Hi, this is Dr. John Day with the Get Your Life Back in Rhythm with Cardiologist Dr. John Day podcast. It is my job to help you optimize for longevity, cardiac performance, and normal sinus rhythm. You can find this on wherever you find your podcasts or check out my YouTube channel or the blog. Please be sure to sign up for our newsletter at my website at drjohnday.com. So let's jump in with our topic today. 4 reasons why fasting may prevent atrial fibrillation and also promote longevity. So why this topic? I was just recently listening to a podcast from Dr. David Sinclair on intermittent fasting, and this is something we've covered. We had a section on it in the longevity plan. We had a section on it in the AFib cure and how it may be beneficial for both longevity and AFib. But on this podcast with Dr. David Sinclair, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, which was a New York Times bestseller, he stated that he now is only eating 1 meal a day. He's not snacking and he's just doing 1 meal a day. Now, I could never do 1 meal a day, but it did help me to redouble my efforts, recommit myself to intermittent fasting, and so hence, that's why we're going to cover it on this topic. And interestingly, the person who helped Dr. David Sinclair write his New York Times bestseller, Lifespan, Dr. Matthew LaPlante, was also the same person who helped me write the longevity plan and the AFib cure. So I feel this connection to Dr. Sinclair. But first reason why intermittent fasting may prevent AFib and promote longevity is that it may slow aging. And from this recent New England Journal of Medicine article, it was covered how if you're a rat, and hopefully none of you are rats, but if you're a rat, then intermittent fasting can help you to live 80% longer. We do know that in the world of atrial fibrillation, so much of atrial fibrillation is age-related. You get age-related fibrosis of the left atrium. Now, certainly some people age faster than others, but as the aging process develops, you get more and more fibrosis or scar tissue in the left atrium, which disrupts electrical pathways and may lead to atrial fibrillation. So obviously the goal is if you're going to prevent atrial fibrillation, you want to minimize this fibrosis and slow the aging process way down. And in fact, this was a study from my former hospital, Intermountain Medical Center, where we looked at short telomeres, and that these telomeres, which could be thought of as the ends of your DNA, as they shorten, you're more prone to chronic diseases, you're more prone to atrial fibrillation, you're more prone to a premature death. But as your telomeres get shorter, you are more prone to atrial fibrillation. And that's what we showed in this study from our hospital with over 3,500 patients. Number 2 reason why intermittent fasting may prevent atrial fibrillation and help to promote longevity is that intermittent fasting may lower blood pressure up to 10 millimeters of mercury. And in this study, where they had people eating between an 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. time frame, they saw that it improved insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, oxidative stress, even without weight loss in men with prediabetes. And so it affected the metabolism in a very positive way, even in people that may not have had some of the other benefits of intermittent fasting, like weight loss. Now, I will say that most studies have shown a significant weight loss with intermittent fasting, but this one showed a 10-point reduction in blood pressure with intermittent fasting. And to put that in perspective, that's huge, considering a typical blood pressure medicine lowers your blood pressure about 8 millimeters of mercury. The impact of intermittent fasting on blood pressure can be greater than taking a blood pressure medicine. And we know that blood pressure and atrial fibrillation are very much linked. In fact, elevated blood pressure doubles the risk of atrial fibrillation. So what is the goal? Certainly with people with atrial fibrillation, you want your blood pressure below 130/80 at all times. And then if your goal is really for longevity, then ideally you want a blood pressure of 110/70. That's without medications. Now, of course, you've got to be very careful here because intermittent fasting can drop blood pressure. And if you're already taking blood pressure medicines, then you could be at risk of dropping your blood pressure too low. So if your goal is intermittent fasting and your doctor has you on a bunch of blood pressure medicines or any blood pressure medicine, make sure you are communicating with your physician before embarking on intermittent fasting. Number 3, intermittent fasting or periodic fasting is good for losing approximately 9 pounds. And this was according to a meta-analysis data, pulling together the best studies on intermittent fasting, showing that you can drop your weight about 9 pounds. This is huge. I found myself that when I have practiced more aggressive intermittent fasting, for example, skipping dinner, I found that it drops my caloric intake for the day about 500 calories. That's huge. Many people with intermittent fasting say skip breakfast. I would argue that based on the data, it is better to skip dinner rather than to skip breakfast if you're going to be aggressive about it. However, at this point in time, for me, what works best is going at least 12 hours without fasting. So I try to finish my last meal of the day by 6 o'clock at night, which then tells me that I cannot eat breakfast until at least after 6 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes I can get 14 or 15 hours of intermittent fasting in. The longer, the better. But at least according to the data, you need a minimum of at least 12 hours to have any type of positive impact on health. And so if you can drop 9 pounds in the process, hey, that's even more benefit there. And this is just data showing that it is better to skip dinner than breakfast if you want to be more aggressive about your intermittent fasting. A very mild approach, like I mentioned, was skipping 12 hours. So if you finish eating at 7 o'clock, don't eat breakfast till 7 a.m. But if you really want to be aggressive about it, try dropping a meal. And this meal timing is important. For example, if your goal is to be a sumo wrestler, and many of these typical sumo wrestler is 300 to 400 pounds, although some can get up 500 pounds plus, even some up to 600 pounds, mealtime matters. And for a sumo wrestler, you want to eat a big meal and then go to sleep. And that helps to convert your food into fat. I'm assuming that most of my listeners, your goal is not to be a sumo wrestler. You don't want a fat intake. And so eating as far away from sleeping as possible, the earlier your dinner, the better. So meal timing is huge when it comes to optimizing your weight, optimizing your health. And then based on our data, any weight loss improves AFib ablation success, or any weight loss can help to prevent atrial fibrillation. Another one of our studies showed that the leaner you are, the lower your risk of atrial fibrillation. This study showed that dropping even 5 pounds had a statistically significant impact when it comes to long-term freedom from atrial fibrillation in patients who have had an ablation. Here are the graphs. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can see a striking reduction, even with just losing 3% of your body weight. And so for a 200-pound person, that could be as little as 6-pound weight loss. Number 4 reason why intermittent fasting may prevent atrial fibrillation and promote longevity is that it may fix diabetes. And in this study, they had patients performing periodic 24-hour fasts. These patients lost an average of 22 pounds with this approach. All of them were able to get off their insulin. All but one was able to get off all their diabetes medications. And the title of the study is Therapeutic Use of Intermittent Fasting for People with Type 2 Diabetes as an Alternative to Insulin. This is huge, but you've got to be very careful about this. If you are diabetic, if you are on diabetes medicines, you can dramatically drop your blood sugar with intermittent fasting. And so you've got to be very careful with this. Only do so under the direction of your physician. You got to be very careful on this, or you may pass out from too low of blood sugars. But at least in this study, under the direction of physicians in this tightly regulated study, these patients were able to drop some serious weight, all of them were able to get off their insulin, and then drop most of their diabetes medicines. Now, an alternative approach to this is from my good friends, fellow colleagues at Intermountain Medical Center at the institution I just left. They argue against intermittent fasting with diabetes because they argue it's just too dangerous. You drop your blood sugar too much. and it could be very serious, particularly if you're taking diabetes medications or insulin. So if you are diabetic, if you want to do intermittent fasting, work very closely with your physician. You need continuous monitoring of your blood glucose to make sure it doesn't drop too low. So the take-home message, fasting with diabetes, you need continuous glucose monitoring. Number 2, you got to work closely with your physician. Number 3, you need a plan for your diabetes medications and insulin, or you're going to drop way too low. But if your goal is to get off all these medicines, then you got to have a plan. You may have to taper down, and with tight regulation to know just how fast your blood sugar is dropping with intermittent fasting. We do know that diabetes increases your atrial fibrillation risk about 40 to 60%. So it's huge. Diabetes is not good for AFib. We also know that the higher your hemoglobin A1C, or the more years of diabetes, further compounds the risk of atrial fibrillation. So if your goal is to prevent atrial fibrillation, then you've really got to work hard to reverse your type 2 diabetes. So how should you fast? Well, as I mentioned, Dr. David Sinclair in his book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, he is now doing 1 meal a day with no snacking. I can't do that. I become too obsessed with food. So I will say that in our book, The Longevity Plan, when we studied this large group of centenarians in the longevity belt in China, we found that none of them snacked. And so just stopping the snacking is one form of intermittent fasting. Half of the centenarians in our study only ate 2 meals a day. They ate an early breakfast with a very early dinner, kind of in the late afternoon, and then they were done for the day. The people in the study who ate 3 meals a day, we found about half the centenarians ate 2 meals a day, half the centenarians ate 3 meals a day. Whether they ate 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day, none of them did any snacking. Those that ate the 3 meals a day, they were practicing daily intermittent fasting of about 14 hours. So a little bit better than what I do. I'm typically 12 to 14 hours. The 2 meal a day people, they were doing about 16 hours a day of intermittent fasting. So what am I doing now? My goal is to rest my pancreas. Diabetes runs in my family. I try to eat a 100% low glycemic diet. What do I mean by low glycemic? Nothing that will spike my blood sugar. I want to rest my pancreas. I want my pancreas to last me my entire life. I want to optimize my glucose metabolism, my insulin sensitivity. Because diabetes is so prevalent in my family, Alzheimer's, which often can be thought of as many people argue it may be type 3 diabetes. I want to do everything I can since Alzheimer's and diabetes run in my family. So I am avoiding all added sugars, except every once in a while I'll have just a little bit with my very dark chocolate. I try to avoid flour, so any bread, pasta I may eat has no flour in it. It's either made with beans or there is no flour. I try to follow my faith's monthly 24-hour fast. I'm trying to fast at least 12 hours daily with a goal of 14 hours. I'm trying to stop eating by 6 p.m. Sometimes that can be tough with my job. And I'm trying to stop snacking. My weakness is nuts. I like to snack on nuts, but I'm trying my best to avoid snacking. So will fasting cure atrial fibrillation? There really is no published data on this, but in the AFib Cure, our best-selling book, we did publish our results from Intermountain Medical Center, where we looked at people who practiced a monthly 24-hour fast as part of their faith. There were 329 patients that we looked at with more than 10 years of follow-up. We saw a trend toward a 20% decreased risk of atrial fibrillation in this group, but it didn't quite reach statistical significance. So how do I put it all together? Intermittent fasting will probably help with atrial fibrillation, whether that's through weight loss, diabetes prevention, reversal, or blood pressure prevention, reversal. It's probably going to have a beneficial effect. Now, if you're going to do it and you are already on high blood pressure medicines or diabetes medicines, you got to work closely with your doc, or your blood pressure may drop dramatically, or your blood sugars may drop dramatically. But if your goal is to get off all of these blood pressure and diabetes medicines, then that's exactly what you want. You just got to do it in a safe way. So what are my 5 concluding thoughts on intermittent fasting? Number one, the data are very compelling for longevity. And we know that caloric restriction works in all animal groups that have been studied on as far as longevity goes, probably works in human, but it's just so hard for humans to practice caloric restrictions, but humans can do intermittent fasting. Number two, the data is also very compelling for blood pressure control. We've talked about that. If you want to prevent or reverse high blood pressure, it could be your secret weapon. Number three, the data are very compelling for weight loss. We talked about that. The typical patient can lose about 9 pounds. Number four, it's compelling for also diabetes prevention or reversal, and it probably helps, although it hasn't been proven, to prevent or treat atrial fibrillation. So those are my 5 thoughts on intermittent fasting. Let me know what you thought. If you want to be seen by one of the cardiologists in our group or cardiac electrophysiologists, which are arrhythmia specialists, give our office a call at 801-266-3418 for one-day access to world-class cardiovascular care. We can get our patients in within 1 business day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.